I'm Paul Kavanagh. Lakes Vikings and Boyne Valley events have organised the Boyne Valley Viking experience here in the grounds of Slane Castle beside the absolutely beautiful River Boyne. On a day like this, where the Boyne is like a mirror, it has shown off these full-scale Viking longships fantastically. What we were doing today was reenacting an actual historic event where Sitrick Silkenbeard of Dublin and Maelmorda of the King of Leinster rebelled against Branberú. So this was a few months before the Battle of Boyne, when both sides were gathering their armies, and the famous warrior Brokkr from the Isle of Man, very famous warrior, came with 1,000 troops to help Sitrick. So Brokkr was on the boats today, sailed up the Boyne with us, landed here to join Sitrick, his compadre, to battle against Branberú. We made these boats in County Wicklow, and they're 40 foot long. They're a scale model of a boat that was found in the fjord at Roskilde in Denmark. So that particular boat was a little bit bigger. It was about 45 feet. The reason we've kept these boats to 40 feet is that means it's the same size as an articulated lorry. We can legally tow them with a 4x4 on the roads without a police escort. But the history behind the design of these boats and what we've done with them is actually, let's call it an archaeological fact, because the remnants of boats that are, say, 45 foot long, that look exactly the same as these, are in the museum in Roskilde in Denmark.
Show you arrows first, I guess. Interestingly, in the Viking tradition, the arrows aren't buried with the dead so much. We usually find them in the living quarters of the Vikings, places like Shamble Street and the old quarter of the town. And helmets the same. We tend not to find helmets in the graves either. But spears, swords, axes, shields all seem to have been seen as appropriate items to put into the grave in the pagan times. So the shield here, for example, is painted over pigskin. There's wood inside. It's only 1 centimetre thick in the centre, and it tapers out to 0.5 centimetre on the edge. The edge is reinforced. Usually when you find originals, you've got the perforations left. Maybe you had iron nails there, maybe it's stitched. This one here is stitched, for example. The paint in those days, they often would have used a paint called egg tempera. So you're mixing natural pigment with a binder like egg yolk to produce a paint. So for example, you might use charcoal ground for the black, and you could use gypsum or chalk for the white, for example. Ochre can be extracted to make red or yellow, for example, as well. So different colours, can be achieved from nature. A glaze can be put on top of the paint using the egg white, just like bakers do today, So with the swords, that's what everyone wants to talk about. We're very lucky in Ireland. There's about 90 swords so far found on the Irish record, about 90. And about 45 of them, about half of them roughly, are found in the Dublin region, famously at places like Kilmainham and Island Bridge, where there was important Viking cemeteries. So these 3 swords here represent 3 different types that existed at the time. A guy called Peterson came up with a typology for these swords, and the one on the left here, left of camera I guess, is type C. It's early. These swords came into being from around the year 750, so they're pre-Viking really, and we see their use throughout the 1st century of Viking activity, more or less. It's in a wooden scabbard. Scabbards are normally made of wood like aspen or poplar, which was chiselled out. And inside the scabbard, I'll show you here, you'd have a fleece lining. And that fleece lining is important because it contains an oil called lanolin oil, which is their 3-in-1 oil. So every time you sheath the weapon, every time you put it back again, you're basically maintaining the weapon. Does that make sense, yeah? This one here is wrapped in linen. Now, some of the swords that we found, especially in the Czech Republic, where there's a lot of really well-preserved ones, we've got linen combined with leather. Sometimes you get linen on its own, sometimes you get leather on its own. wrapped around the core. This strap retainer here is in the Dublin style from Fishamble Street. We found a few of these from what looks like a workshop where maybe scabbards were being refurbished at the time. So that retains the strap. Typically in the Viking age, the sword is worn, over the shoulder, but it can be worn around the waist as well. And this bone buckle here, very delicate little thing. That's a Fishamble Street find as well from Dublin. So try and keep it as Irish as possible. The grips for Viking swords are very short. As far as I know, there's no grip longer than, I think, 11 centimeters. So very tight grip, and there's no two-handed swords. It's made of wood. This one here is wrapped in pigskin, and the pigskin is glued, kept in place with twine. Maybe after 24 hours, you remove the twine, and that leaves the imprint on the grip. In the middle there, you got a piece of leather tongue glued in place, and that's called a riser to us leatherworking nerds, and that gives an extra bit of grip there, The pommel is obviously there to counterbalance the weight of the blade, all right? And often in the early Viking age, in terms of morphology, they're roughly triangular in shape, which of course, when you're up close in a battle situation, that could be a more useful weapon than the blade itself. Crossguards of Viking swords tend to be short, but they're serviceable, and it's enough to catch an enemy blade to protect yourself. So these ones here are single edge. These are a Norwegian speciality, and we think they were domestically made. Blade and hill furniture all together made domestically in Norway. The next sword we have here is similar date, 9th century Viking roughly, but it's type D in the Peterson typology. These are quite unusual, quite flashy looking swords with their bronze decorative work. And you got the shape there as well with silver plate and a locket at the top there. Again, you have the Fishamble Street style slider there. This sword here is the more typical Viking blade that we might be used to seeing. Double-edged with a single fuller down the centre that occupies approximately a third of the breadth of the blade. This sword here, it's likely it was made in what was then known as Frankland. Frankland is basically the French-German, Holy Roman Empire Mark I back in the day. So, lovely thing, isn't it? This sword speaks of status. It's maybe a weapon, all right, but I think, as an item of status, it's very, very important for the politicians of that time who were better armed than the current lot were and could use their weapons properly. Now, finally, this one here, it's a little bit different, isn't it? We're seeing some images here from England. There's Danish Vikings, over in England, especially, famously with the Danelaw. 3 of the English kingdoms are overrun at this time, Only Wessex holds out in the south. And this crossguard is thought to be an English kind of influence, and it comes into some of the Irish swords as well. The knuckle pommel is a later style that we see in the middle Viking age, and this style is important from an Irish point of view because it persists in the Western Highlands of Scotland and in Gaelic Ireland right up till 15th century even, so fascinating, lovely thing. And the shape of this case is copper alloy, as the museum guardedly says. We could say brass, we could say bronze. And you got the symbol of a raven there perhaps, which is always, of course, important in the mythology of the Vikings. So, I'm such a messy child. So the arrows. We found quite a few of these arrows in the habitation areas of the Vikings, 10th century Viking Dublin. It's different types. This one here is known as the bodkin. And if you think you heard the term bodkin before, you might have. One of the 14 tribes of Galway is the bodkin family, so they might have been purveyors of these arrowheads. They're designed to pierce mail armour, break those links apart, So on the Irish record, roughly 70% of all arrows found are of this type. Yeah. You also get some broadheads for hunting. So you got barbs there. And this one here with 2 heads, diamond kind of a shape. That's also more likely a hunting arrow. Of course, you could use the hunting arrows against unarmoured foes, of course, and the wound is all the greater for it, A lot of the Viking arrowheads also are distinctive because, unlike 1 or 2 of them will have sockets, as in the wood goes into the arrow. But many of them are tanged, and that's why you're seeing a wrapping here, because the arrow has a tang that goes into the wood. Therefore, you need to reinforce the outside. So that's the value of reconstructing these things. Back in the day, you need stiff feathers for arrows, so they would have used hawk, or in this case, you got goose, which can be white, can be grey. So that's the arrows. Worth a look, I guess. A couple of other weapons just to round out. In the Viking grave, you would have spears perhaps, or axes. So, range of spears here. This is Peterson's Type B. This will drive you crazy. And it's got these very distinctive lugs, doesn't it? These were imitating the hunting spears at the time, you know. But of course these lugs could be used also in combat also. You don't want that spear going too far to Einar if you still got to take Bjorn out, right? So these are very early. We think these are, you know, Frankland again, so Germany, France, imported, and they're very early, you know, 750 up to around 830 around that time. There's some later ones then. This one here is very important from the Irish point of view. It's modelled on a spear from a place called Woodstown. It's a very important Viking site that was discovered just over 20 years ago. I was there myself the day the site was found, so an epic day in Irish archaeology. It's got a very distinctive shape. This is Peterson's Type F, and they often have these lines traversing the socket below, so that's a distinctive feature there. One of the best quality spearheads we've ever found on the Irish record. I think the original one offhand measures 44 centimetres, 45 centimetres. It's very like another famous spear from Norway known as the Lendbreen spear. That was a spear that was preserved in the ice, and the whole haft of the spear was preserved, which is really rare, you know. But if you can say there's some benefits of global warming, that's one of them. But look, it's hardly worth it, I guess. But that's the length of the haft. It's a little less than we might expect from a Viking thrusting spear in combat, but it's about 2.2, 2.3 metres. We think the average spear length was about 2.5. And I think the longest spear found so far is one of about 3.2 that was found in Poland from the Viking Age. It's almost the length of, you know, Cromwellian pike, not far off, you know. So that's that one. This one here is quite similar. Again, it's a general diamond shape. It's Type K on the Peterson typology. You can see how beautifully it's been made. This is the system of, you know, twisted rods and pattern welding as it's known. So absolutely gorgeous. You've got an iron core there, and you've got steel edge hammer welded onto it. The socket is also made in the same way, just in a perpendicular manner. In Sweden, the trend was that these sockets were decorated with silver plate, and in Norway they were planers. This is probably a Norwegian one, for example, you know. Beautiful, beautiful thing though, you know. And in Ireland's Viking Age, the Norwegians really are the ones who dominate in terms of numbers, although the Danes also play an important role. This is what we call a Dublin type spearhead, locally made. They tend to be a little smaller, but that could be just the fall of the dice with the archaeology we're finding, you know. And the central medial ridge tends to be almost imperceptible, but it is there. They are slightly lozenge shape like other Viking spears that we find at this time. So, you know, you got your Dublin type, and anyone who tries to make a typology of Dublin types is probably pretty foolish. It's going to take a lot of work, that is, you know. There's a lot of nuance with them, you know, a lot of individuality. So they're interesting in their own right. This one here, the odd looking one, it's a find from, I think it's from County Offaly, and it's like 3 blades there, isn't it? Really unusual. It's a one-off, completely a one-off, you know, European-wise one-off. So it's got a very small socket, so there's not much purchase, yeah. So this one is likely a javelin. Does that make sense? Because a thrusting spear, you want a deeper socket, if that makes any sense. So just to finish off on axes, I'm not even going to bother showing you one, but hand axes, you know, were pretty common in the first half of the Viking Age, and in the very earliest raids they would have used, you know, wood chopping axes known as skeg axes, heavy with a wedge, you know, good for splitting wood, you know, but also useful in combat to a certain degree. But more specialised axes emerged as the Viking Age goes on, and there was a series of double-handed axes called the M axis, and M1, M2, M3, and the M3 is a bit later, really, you know, 12th century. But this is the type of double-handed weapon that Brian Boru may have been killed with at the Battle of Clontarf, you know, age 73, on that fateful day, 23rd of April, 1014. It was a Good Friday, hence he was at prayer. So he had his reasons. So, lovely thing, iron head, carbon steel edge, and to hammer weld that to the core, you're talking about 1300 degrees centigrade, you know. So a lot of work goes into these weapons, very high status in their own right, you know. The sword, though, in general is the most expensive weapon, you know, and I could tell you it's worth a Rolls Royce or a Mercedes this or that, but I think better way to put it is that sword, you know, from the Carolingian texts at least, run-the-mill sword, 7 heads of cattle. And you could probably buy 15 run-of-the-mill spears for that one sword. So I'll give you an idea how much swords are worth, you know. Weapon like this, pretty pricey weapon as well. It's the weapon of a professional, you know. And a sword like this might be twice the price of a run-of-the-mill sword, for example, you know. So different sorts of values, but as I say, there's status involved here as well, you know. So hopefully that's enough to fill a bit of content for you guys.
Hi, I'm Richard Fontes. I'm a blacksmith. I forge various things, bits and pieces, in the traditional manner from basically the Irish histories. Just short of shoeing horses, I suppose. But all the decorative ironworks and things of that nature come from my forge in Foxfire Forge. And even with the little bellows here, the hand pump bellows, which you really don't see that often anymore, they're actually quite effective in a lot of ways, especially whenever you're trying to make something. Ha! That sucked. But now, I think the importance of continuing on the blacksmith traditions is because it is a tradition, and there's a lot of people out there to this day that are picking it up. So it really stands to the craft itself at how interesting and intricate it is that so many people in Ireland would be interested in actually having a go at it. There's a group of blacksmiths that I know of. There's 750 of us in Ireland. And we all do various styles of things. My craft is primarily Celtic and Viking. There's others that do gates and others that do knives. The farriers are still around, strong, shoeing the horses. Don't know. You can find me on Foxfire Forge on Facebook or Instagram. If you'd like to come and visit the page, I'd appreciate it. Maybe a little thumbs up if you don't mind.
Hello, we are Sacred Knot and we are here with Northern Fire. We've been tattooing through the day here at Slane, as well as having the work of many artists that you can see in front of you from the artistic collective known as Northern Fire. And yeah, enjoy.